Well, good evening, everybody. I don't have any idea how many people I'm addressing, but we're in the middle of learning the aorist tense. We pretty much finished last week in chapter 22 on the second aorist, which Bill Mounts decided to do before first aorist. And the reason he did, you might remember, is that it's so similar in form to the imperfect tense, which was chapter 21. Chapter 23, which we'll get into tonight, is the first aorist, and it's got the same concept as second aorist. It's only that the form is different, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I'd like to finish up something that we left kind of dangling last week. In the book on page 248, he's got a section he calls Advanced Information. And he talks about several things that are, I think, pretty important. We'll be using some of these. But the first thing he mentions in 22.21 is the concept of undefined. Now, I'm going to use the word undefined rather than perfective. You know that in previous editions, that's the term he used. It's only in this fourth edition he introduced the terms perfective and imperfective, which I find confusing. Anyway, change the word perfective to undefined, and that's what the aorist tense uses, an undefined aspect, which is different than punctiliar. In older grammars, it used to be commonly taught that the aorist tense was usually, if not always, a punctiliar action. And that's simply not true. And he'll make a good point here. One of the primary areas of confusion in Greek exegesis comes when people confuse the Greek perfective, well, I'm going to change that to undefined, aspect with the English punctiliar aspect. The English punctiliar describes an action as occurring in a single point of time. The tidal wave hit the boat. The Greek undefined is not necessarily punctiliar. It can be, but most of the time, I think you could say it's not. It tells you nothing about the action of the verb except that it happened. That's what undefined aspect means. Part of the misconception surrounding the Greek undefined aspect is due to the fact that it can be used to describe a punctiliar action. However, such a verb is not punctiliar. Oh, hi, Ray. We're just starting, so come join us, please. Now, is this microphone picking up on
Yeah,
me?
this is fine, yeah.
Okay. Right, we're
22?
We will be getting into 23 tonight, but I want to finish up a little section that we didn't cover in 22, page 248 of the textbook. I'll wait till you get settled here. This is in what he calls the advanced information section, and I think it's very interesting, but it's useful. Now, you might remember, Ray, that I'm going back to the older term that he used in previous editions. Instead of the words perfective and imperfective, I'm going to use undefined and continuous. So wherever you see the word perfective in the textbook here, change it to undefined. If you don't mind, I'll start this paragraph again because Ray just joined us. Are you open to that section?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Undefined versus punctiliar. One of the primary areas of confusion in Greek exegesis comes when people confuse the Greek perfective or undefined aspect with the English punctiliar. The word punctiliar means point action. Um, the English punctiliar describes an action as occurring in a single point of time. The tidal wave hit the boat. The Greek undefined is not necessarily punctiliar. I supplied the word necessarily. It tells you nothing about the action of the verb except that it happened. Part of the misconception surrounding the Greek undefined aspect is due to the fact that it can be used to describe a punctiliar action. However, such a verb is not punctiliar because of its aspect, but because of the context and the meaning of the word. For instance, that word hit or strike, for instance, is an action that occurs instantaneously, punctiliarly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. You cannot use the continuous aspect to describe a punctiliar action, like with the present tense. I am going. That's not punctiliar. You can't make am going the continuous form of the present tense to be a punctiliar action. So by default, we would use the undefined. I hope that's not too confusing. Okay. Now, under exegesis, he's got four.
It might be helpful to actually, because all these distinctions are made, but I find his explanation a little bit lacking.
Well,
Because in English, this example, uh, the wave hit the boat.
yeah,
We can say that's punctiliar, but there isn't any particular parsing of the verb that changes whether it's punctiliar or not.
true.
It's simple past tense, and that simple past tense may or may not be punctiliar.
That's right.
And he seems to be saying that's the same way the aorist works.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
right.
aorist is undefined action in past time by definition. But some verbs, by their nature,
Agreed, and it's the same in English. I
that's
mean, we
right.
have the same situation. Now he's saying something else about what what I think we're calling. Well, we talked about the present tense, which we're saying is may or may not be.
Yeah,
It could either be undefined or continuous.
that's correct.
And then when we looked at the imperfect,
Tense.
it is considered to be continuous.
Continuous in past time, yes.
Okay, now,
it's not.
okay.
Yeah.
So the example then hitting the boat. Well, there's not much sense in that, but I'm trying to think of an example where it's making any sense.
In scripture, you
The
mean?
way, okay, so John was washing the windows. Okay, would be different. But if I were to make these statements, John washed the windows.
Yeah.
John was washing the windows.
Yes.
In fact, if that's all I say, there's no meaningful difference. If I say John was washing the windows when I walked in the room, that's correct English. If I said John washed the windows when I walked in the room, it's probably not good English because there's something missing. You would probably have meant to say John was washing the windows when I walked in the room, or else you meant to say something a little different, like John began washing the windows when I went in the room.
Right.
And I think that's the subtleties that he's talking about, but he doesn't give any examples
Well,
that are
we're going to
really
get the examples in the exercises.
But there's yes, but we read this already last week. But what's difficult about it is none of his examples are sufficiently complete to make any sense.
Okay.
And I think if you look at the example I just gave, it is a situation where it might be important to know that when he says something like this one that says, there's one in here that began, the action began. Like the king became furious. So when when we walked in the room, the king became furious. as opposed to when we walked in the room, the king was furious.
Yeah.
Now, there's a very subtle difference, but an important one because it implies I caused it. And he's saying that if you use the aorist,
it can also mean by happenstance you walked into a room where other people were with the king, and you just by happenstance happened to arrive there as they made him furious.
Yeah.
well,
I mean, it could be that.
Yeah.
But I don't.
It's not precise enough.
But I'm not. Yeah, and I'm not sure because how would I say it if when we walked in the room, the king was already furious, which is the opposite statement, meaning he was already angry and had nothing to do with us.
I think you would do it with the aorist.
Probably would be to say something like, the king was furious, or the king was already furious when we walked.
Well, we might.
You add the word already.
Yeah.
Okay,
you
but
have to add something.
Okay, but in this Greek statement, there's a range of meanings, and he is saying, and the king became furious. And I'm saying, how would you write it if it was simply that the king was already furious? And you don't have enough words. I mean, would you use a different tense?
No, I don't think you would.
So aorist doesn't tell you that it happened because I walked in the room. And that's implied.
Well, now, there are ways to do it, but we haven't studied them yet.
Right, you see what I'm saying?
Participles, yeah.
And I think it's really difficult to have meaningful discussions about these verbs in a complete isolation of context, because it would be probably really presumptuous to add the word became furious unless it makes the grammar not work somehow. I mean,
when you get more
context, we're adding meaning to it, right? I mean,
yeah, but when you get more context, you can be.
Well, but I mean, am I making sense? I want to try to make sense out of this.
No, you're making perfect.
And I think I'm beginning to get what he's saying about the. So if we look at the aorist, it really does line up pretty well with our simple past.
Yeah.
And then he's saying there's these other things that you might mean by it, but I'm wondering, what sort of my mind is going, okay, sure, you say that, but how do you get to decide that? Because if the context makes the English awkward and strange, right? Like, after we entered the room, the king was furious. Okay, that might actually sort of reasonably imply that what I'm trying to say is after we entered the room, the king became furious. Mm-hmm. But if I simply said when we entered the room, the king was furious, I don't know which was meant, actually. I can't tell from that context, and I don't think the Greek verb tells us. That's okay. Is that fair?
Yeah, yes. I think so. But let's wait until we use some of these in the exercises too. Okay. Well, now, Drew, I think you had something. You were starting to say something.
No, I think we covered a lot of it. So,
now,
yeah,
did we read this section already?
We did.
All right. Well, then
it's okay.
I apologize.
No, it's a good discussion. I hope that I haven't said too much.
Well, let's go on to chapter 23 then. Overview. It's a good exegetical insight, but I'll let you read that on your own.
Okay.
Overview. In this chapter, you'll learn that first aorists are formed with an augment, same as the second aorist, with the aorist active tense stem. Tense formative, that's something different. Sigma alpha is the tense formative for the first aorist, and secondary endings. That's what same as the second aorist did. Okay, that's first bullet point. Second one. Most first aorist tense stems are identical to their present tense stem and their verbal roots. Now that makes sense to me because if you have a regular verb in English, it's going to have the same tense stem in both present and past tense. What makes it irregular is that it has a different tense stem. And that's the same situation we have with second aorists. Okay, third point. When the sigma of the tense formative is added to a tense stem ending in a stop, the same changes you saw in the future. Blep plus the tense formative for future is sigma. The P becomes a psi. That makes sense too. And other combinations with other consonants act the same way as the future tense. Fourth point, contract verbs lengthen their final stem vowel before the tense formative, just as they did in the future tense. An example is genao, that's an alpha contract, and you add the sigma alpha, tense formative for the aorist, first aorist, I should say, and the alpha, the contract vowel, gets lengthened to an eta. No surprise there. And then liquid stems don't use the sigma alpha as a tense formative. They use simply the alpha, not the sigma alpha. And we'll see how this works as we get into it. In the English, as I discussed in the previous chapter, English forms its past tense in two different ways. An irregular verb alters its stem. I eat my lunch at noon. I ate my dinner last night. Different stems. A regular verb adds ed to the stem. I clean my desk every day, present tense. I cleaned mine last year, and it stayed clean. I doubt it.
That was cool. Yeah, right. Where does he live?
Okay. Would somebody else like to read for a bit?
As I also discussed in the previous chapter, Greek has two ways of forming the aorist tense. The second aorist is the Greek equivalent of the English irregular formulation in that it does not use a tense formative. The first aorist is the Greek equivalent of the English regular formulation. In the first aorist, the tense stem is normally identical to the present tense stem and the verbal root. And the tense uses a tense formative, sigma alpha. The majority of Greek verbs follow this pattern. Thank you. I was going in, everything just went dark. Drew doesn't know what's going on, I'll bet. Translation. The aorist active is normally translated with the simple English past, indicating an undefined perfective action. I studied. Whether a verb is a first or a second aorist has no connection to its meaning, just its form. Remember that aspect is primary, and all the aorist tells you is that an event occurred. It tells you nothing more about the aspect of the event, and the aorist is not necessarily punctiliar, it is undefined.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's look together at this gray section here. I like the way he does it. He separates up the different elements of the tense. First, for the aorist tense, first aorist, you have the augment. And you remember what the augment is for a verb that begins with a consonant?
It's usually an eta.
Epsilon.
Or an epsilon. Sepsilon, yes. Sorry.
Okay. But what if it begins with a vowel?
Well, it often becomes an eta, among other things, depending on what the vowel is.
It's lengthened.
Right.
For instance, an omicron would get lengthened to a omega.
Yeah.
And an alpha, if it begins with an alpha,
that should be an eta.
It should be an eta. And if it begins with an epsilon, it should lengthen to an eta. If it begins with an iota,
an eta?
No, there is a long
iota. Still stays iota.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But there are very few verbs. I can't even think of one that begin with iota.
No, it's not subscript iota, is it? No? Or is it?
No.
No.
Well, let's The verbs that we will be studying are going to be starting with either omicron.
He mentioned, so you don't subscript iota. Iota subscript goes on another. So it would be like epsilon iota is what you were thinking maybe, but yeah.
Okay, well, as we come to them, you'll see. Okay, then after the aorist active tense stem, you have a tense formative, and for first aorist, it's sigma alpha, unless it's a liquid, and then it's simply alpha.
A liquid stem would be one that ends in a liquid consonant? Or are we going to get to that? Maybe I'm jumping ahead.
Let me make sure I said that right. Yeah, he'll show us that later.
Where are you?
I didn't.
You're in 23.5?
4.
23.4. I added that and I should not have.
Okay.
Let's wait till we get to it.
Okay. I'm trying to follow along.
The tense formative is sigma alpha for the first aorist.
Okay.
And then you down to the 23.5 on that first line.
I didn't catch what you mean. Well, then you have the secondary active personal ending, which is what you had with the second aorist. So the only difference in the formation of a first aorist is that you have the tense formative sigma alpha. And the stem will be in almost every case the same as the present tense stem. He mentioned that in the previous page. Okay. Here's a paradigm of luo. In the first aorist, on the column, the first column is the first aorist. You have the augment epsilon all the way down the line. You have the aorist tense stem, which is identical to the present tense stem, which is lu, lambda upsilon. Then you have your tense formative for first aorist, which is sigma alpha. Now the first, am I?
Yeah, no,
too fast?
it's just a lot. It's graphically, I'm trying to make sense out of a bunch of things. It's okay, keep going. Okay. So on the future, it was sigma epsilon, right?
No, just simply sigma. Yeah.
Well, right. Good. But then we had a connective vowel or something, didn't we?
Yes, you do.
Right. Okay. And on
there's
this
no
one,
connective vowel.
here we don't have a connective vowel. We have, okay. All right. Because it looks very similar.
Because the tense formative takes the place of the connecting vowel. And then the third column lists the endings. And in the first singular, there is no ending. So that's why the bare tense formative is for first singular. Now, then you have the sigma for the second singular person. Sigma alpha, sigma, sauce. But then the third singular, it does a strange thing. It changes the sigma alpha to sigma epsilon. This is characteristic of all first aorists. So if you see a sigma epsilon, you can be almost certain that it's a third singular of the first aorist. The same thing happened. Well, wait a minute.
In the future, we did something different.
Yeah, see the last column there, there's a second aorist from lambano, but the root, instead of lambda alpha mu beta, is simply lambda alpha beta. That makes it a different root than the present tense stem. So
I'm trying to learn. I'm looking at the table that we have here and trying to go. How do these things
It's
look?
probably arranged differently, and
Well, no, it's okay. But we talked about so in the future tense used secondary endings. It was different
the
endings.
future tense used primary endings, didn't it?
Well, I'm just looking at the table here and comparing things. And so present tense, for example, seems to have the same endings as
yeah.
future.
That's the active endings, not or primary endings, not the secondary endings.
Okay, and now what we're using is secondary endings?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Even though it's an active voice, it uses secondary endings.
Well, okay, all we know is active, so that's
Yeah.
not really meaning anything to us.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. So the last two columns he gives us for comparison. The imperfect, you can compare that to the first aorist in the first column. And
Okay.
the endings, yeah, the endings are the same except for the first person singular.
Okay.
And then comparing imperfect to second aorist, you have identical endings. Okay, enough. You can use that information as you do the exercises. And 23.6. You want to continue reading, Ray?
Okay. The first aorist is augmented just as the second aorist and continuous.
No, that's imperfect tense.
Yeah, imperfect tense. Okay.
Yeah, imperfect tense is different from imperfective aspect. That's why I don't like the term
augmented. Yeah, the augment in the front. Yeah.
Yeah.
The first aorist active is formed from the first aorist tense stem, which is generally the same form as the present tense stem and the verbal root. If the aorist stem of a verb is different from the present stem, the verb will usually have a second aorist, and the present tense stem will be an altered form of the verbal root.
I have to admit, I don't understand that too well, but that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, there's a sharp distinction between second aorist and first aorist.
Yeah, so that would sound like then that would be something really irregular, which makes it good that it's not
very rare. Yeah.
Okay, tense formative. The Greek adds a tense formative between the stem and the personal endings to form the first aorist in the same way that it adds sigma to form the future. The first aorist active tense formative is sigma alpha. And some argue that the tense formative is sigma and alpha is a connecting vowel.
No.
Okay, that's what I noticed.
It's one of those people who so argue, I guess.
Yeah, but that's when I first learned Greek. We used a different textbook, and they didn't use the same. They used the connecting vowel with the ending and said that was the ending.
Yeah.
So that's Mounts, and I think he's correct in separating those out.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And so this is just different linguists trying to reverse engineer why languages are the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Having different opinions.
Yep.
Well, it happened because the older grammars did it that way.
No, but I'm saying the reason that different linguists who are all experts would have different opinions is because all having to essentially reverse engineer how the language got to be the way it is.
When someone started speaking this language and it migrated, over like many thousands of years, no one sat down and said these are the parts of it. No, they just started doing things.
Exactly. Which is
and now someone's trying to describe it, and they got just different methods for describing it.
Right. And linguists today, they're basically hypothesizing how it got to be the way it is, and that amounts to reverse engineering.
And I'm just kind of going, how do we kind of recognize this and try to figure out patterns? And I guess what's a little hard about it is I don't really know. I'm trying to think. It seemed what I keep going back to, and I don't do languages except that way back in high school and in French, and I took a quarter of German in college, and I'm like, they taught us like all the tenses for a verb. and said, this is a pattern. This is what this is like. And there's a lot of them like this. Learn this pattern. And then he said, here's all the tenses for another verb. Learn this one. And it's a different pattern. And then there's the other one's completely irregular. Have to know. But they just kind of taught us how the pattern went for a few verbs. And then we learned more verbs that followed those patterns. This seems kind of complicated.
Well, that's because Mounce is committed to the principle that you don't need to have memorize all these different paradigms.
I'm not memorizing paradigms. I didn't learn English by thinking about how English evolved.
None of it. As a child,
I didn't find it difficult to learn er ist, sie ist, I am, yeah, sie sind. I didn't have any trouble learning that, and they're completely irregular. But the way this is broken out, it's really kind of hard to really learn any of the verbs. There's probably a dozen patterns that covers most of them. And am I the only one that finds this is a hard way to learn?
Well, probably not.
Okay, go ahead.
This book.
This is why I keep looking at this chart and going, okay, we're learning each of these things. But he doesn't use the same verb. What really kind of makes it hard is, like, in these things, we don't even have necessarily the same verb in each of these things.
True.
I know.
And it's like, well, did any of the verbs have all the tenses? I couldn't tell you.
Well, Luo is about the only one I can think of that has a full paradigm for all the different tenses.
But he doesn't use it for middle indicative future.
Yeah, he doesn't use it for second aorist because it's a regular verb.
Because it's regular?
Yeah, well, he doesn't use that term because it doesn't have a second aorist form.
Well, okay, it doesn't have that form.
Yeah.
But it also doesn't have a future form, apparently.
Luo
future
does.
Middle. It has no future middle.
Oh, it does.
But he doesn't show it here.
He doesn't show it there because he's using a different verb. Yeah.
This is exactly my point.
Yeah. And I remember a few months ago, you were struggling with that, and I showed you the paradigm.
Yeah, we have it.
And it's there.
It's all right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Dave, because there are times when I can understand he needs to switch to a different verb because, one of them may be with the different kinds of conjugation. So he's got to switch for that. But it seems like a lot of the time when he switches verbs as examples, it's just gratuitous.
It is.
Yeah. Well, with all the irregularities in his method of teaching, I think this is far better than other books that the first grammar I learned from was so weird. And
so is Greek really are the Greek verbs just really so god-awful different that the same method that everybody learns for all the Romance languages doesn't work? Because the same method for teaching German, Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, English to conjugate verbs, everybody does it the same way.
I can think of one thing that made me more difficult, and maybe this, I'm not saying this is, but there's a possibility this could be what the explanation is. One of the things I was taught at DLI, both times that I went through there, is that over time, languages tend to become more and more simple as they evolve.
That happens to Greek.
People get tired of the complication. So when you're studying a foreign language today in school, they're teaching you the modern form of the language. We're not trying to learn modern Greek. We're trying to learn an ancient form of Greek before it's had time to evolve into the simplified Greek of today.
Yeah. So
that's possibly the explanation.
Yeah. And that was happening even during the period of Koine. If you compared Koine Greek to classical Greek,
right,
a lot of the complexities and finer nuances of language were lost by that time. For instance, they used to have not only singular and plural, they had singular, dual, and plural as persons. Okay. I see Drew nodding. He probably has experienced that sort of. Another thing was changing was there's a different category of verbs called me verbs, mu, iota verbs. Sometimes they're called athematic verbs. But those were being phased out and replaced by thematic verbs, the omega type verbs. So that's another change. Another thing that was happening was it used to be that they didn't use prepositions very much in classical form, but prepositions evolved from adverbs, and by the time of Koine, they were very common. But the use of different well, I'm not able to
Trying to
explain it.
communicate without prepositions, that would seem to me like trying to get someone from China to speak without using the letter NG. I mean, imagine what their language would look like if you just removed that one letter from it.
I have no idea.
Well, like suppose you lived in Hong Kong, except it now becomes Hoko. I mean, just like how many words could you say in Chinese that don't have that?
I guess the point is that they did something to decline or conjugate that allowed for that. That
they had to have had some other system.
Yeah, there were.
But man, it had to be more complicated.
All right. Well, let's get back on track here.
Okay.
I think we've got to 23.9.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we skipped one paragraph. The tense formative for the active is easy to spot. The only time it alters its form is the third person singular, where instead of the sigma alpha, it's sigma epsilon. And that was true in the second aorist and in the imperfect. Well, no, you had an epsilon nu, it's true, but that's because the connecting vowel alternated between omicron and epsilon. Okay, continue on 23.9.
Personal endings. The first aorist active uses secondary personal endings because the aorist tense is augmented. This means it has the same personal endings as the imperfect and the second aorist, except in the first person singular, sigma alpha, and not sigma alpha nu, like elusa.
Because it's augmented.
Yeah, just this is a kind of a handy thing to remember. The augment indicates past time, and the secondary personal endings also indicate past time.
Oh.
So
well, okay, that's fine. So augments mean past time.
yes, just like ed in our English.
Okay, that would have been all right. That's fine. We're learning. So there's a prefix in the front which we call augment.
Yes.
I just feel like what's the allergy to using common words we all know and already use? But okay, so so there's a prefix on front of things that have past tense. Just like in English, there's normally a suffix, and on top of that, they have these conjugation endings.
Yeah.
And the conjugation endings for past tense are different than the conjugation endings for the other tenses.
Yeah.
Well, that's not hard to say, and it's very common language.
Why don't you write a text?
No, I don't know, but no, I'm not a teacher of this, but write it. The pattern's not really, he just goes through all these specifics in incredible detail without giving you the pattern.
Yeah. All right.
Because it's augmented, it has second personal endings, doesn't tell me anything. If that's not the reason, it's because it's something that happened in the past. Right?
Right.
I mean, normally thinking that's
Right,
how it's
that's-
right.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
part of our trouble is that we think in terms of English grammar, and Greek grammar is quite a bit different.
No, I think about things in relationships. And what we have
and
here
functions.
is a whole bunch of tenses. First aorist, second aorist, perfect and imperfect. And they're all somehow related. And so the form of those tenses has these things in common. They have a prefix and they have a different ending than the present tense.
And that
Okay.
indicates its function.
Yeah, it has something to do with the function of the verb. It's not an English thought. I mean, it's just organizing the information in a way that we can look at it and understand the patterns.
Okay,
Your
That's all.
explanation was way clearer than Mouse's.
Yeah,
it was.
yes, definitely.
Okay, I
Yeah.
want to remind us of something else that comes into play with verbs in any tense. You have quite often a compound verb, which connects a preposition to the
Mhm.
verb.
Yes.
And if you augment one of those compound verbs, you put the augment after the prepositional prefix
Yes.
and before the verbal part.
Right.
So, proserchomai.
Yes, we've talked about this.
Okay,
Yes.
I just wanted to remind
Yes,
us
yes,
about
yes,
that.
that's okay. But that's a compound thing. That's not, it's a compound. So that pros is not a prefix, it's a compound.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe there's confusion about the words because in English we might do something similar and we might call it a prefix. But I think anyway, it's all right.
Okay.
You
want to continue, Ray, in second paragraph 23.9?
If you have been memorizing the personal endings say he wants us to memorize again, as a combination of connecting vowel and the personal ending, example, amen, then you may not see the similarity between the endings in the first aorist and the imperfect as clearly. But if you've been keeping the connecting vowel and personal ending distinct, such as amen, then you already know the endings used in the first aorist.
He's just trying to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just
continue.
provide a warning.
Yeah.
Contract verbs. As was the case in the future, contract verbs lengthen their contract vowel before the tense formative. The verb agapao becomes agapesa.
See, the alpha of the contract vowel lengthened to eta before the tense formative.
Stems ending in a stop. You have already seen how the stops change when followed by a sigma in both third declension nouns and verbs in the future. The same is true in the first aorist active.
I don't think we need to take the time to go
done
through
this.
all that. We've done it before. You can go back and look at it in detail if you want to.
Yeah.
But I think that's an important point in 2310 about lengthening the contract vowel before adding the tense formative.
That all just goes back in the square of stops.
This is a similar thing we've been seeing happen, right?
Yes, it is.
It's not new.
Not new.
Okay.
2312, I think, is an important thing. It doesn't occur very often. I'll just read this if you don't mind, Ray.
Whoa.
This second.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
The second aorist stems sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes have first aorist endings. But it seems to me, if I remember right, they almost always occur in third person plural. He didn't say that here, but he gives us these four examples. And the first one is very common. Instead of a pawn with an omicron, you will see a pawn. But you also will see a pawn with an omicron. They'll both occur, but they're And that's the most
It happens
common.
both
It's almost
ways.
always in first person plural.
No, third person.
Third person.
But
Well-
but wait a minute. I'm sorry. Is that that doesn't look like a third person plural? That looks like a
Apon?
first.
Yeah, that's a second aorist verb. It's the aorist of Lego.
Oh, there. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm looking at my ending. Okay, all right, got it.
Okay, you will see both a pawn with an omicron and a pawn with an alpha. Most of the time, I believe it'll be with an omicron, but you have variations. That's all he's trying to
So
say.
to ask a really dumb question, where's the sigma?
Sigma?
I'm sorry. Well, I'm
Well,
sorry.
these are second aorists.
These are okay. The second aorist.
They don't have the sigma alpha
Okay, I'm sorry.
transformative.
This is second aorist, and they use the
They use
alpha instead of-
sometimes they use an alpha instead of an omicron. And
Okay.
that's true with althon or althan. I have a hard time saying it differently, but and then adon versus adan, and then enenkon versus enenkon. Those are the four most common verbs that do that sort of thing.
Okay.
But just be careful. You might be expecting an omicron, but sometimes you'll see an alpha.
Mm. Wow.
Okay, the halftime review is what we already studied. Let's not read that. Somebody want to read liquid aorist active?
Guess I can read it.
Uh-huh.
Overview chart. First aorist, active, indicative, liquid. The augment plus the aorist active tense stem plus the tense formative, that is alpha. Secondary plus the secondary active personal ending. The example then is eta plus
Epsilon plus.
I'm sorry, epsilon plus men plus alpha plus men.
Yeah.
Becomes
And menamen.
menamen. Thank you.
Yeah. So the difference is simply that it's not a sigma alpha tense formative, but just a alpha. It's a little bit easier to say amenamen versus amensamen.
Okay.
And I think that's the reason they did it.
This
And remember, sometimes in other cases, the sigma will drop out when it's between two vowels. So it's a similar thing here.
And what makes it a liquid verb or a liquid stem is
There
that
are four cases.
Okay.
Two of them are nasals,
Mhm.
mu and nu. Those are liquid consonants. The other two are rho and lambda. Those
Right.
four are considered liquids.
And so if the stem ends in one of those consonants, then it's a liquid stem.
That's right.
Okay.
And see here, the stem is main.
All right.
I think I gave you a chart. I didn't bring it with me.
It was
that colorful chart.
We were giving us back with liquid verbs, right?
Yeah.
Afterwards. That's okay.
I think that was when we studied liquid futures.
Yeah, that's where it was. Sounds like a stock exchange thing.
Sounds like what?
Something on the stock exchange.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the one. And there aren't too many of them, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I forget what color I chose for liquids.
I'm looking for the legend.
It's on the bottom. I should have put it at the front.
All right. And then you said something else here, which maybe we should just.
Contractor yellow, liquid, or green.
Okay. What did I say?
Should we learn what maybe we should just let it go. You said something about two vowels. And the sigma between two vowels.
Yeah, he used the term intervocalic. When a sigma occurs between two vowels, vocalic and vowel, it will often drop out.
But not always.
I don't know whether I can go that far to say.
Okay, so we can expect the sigmas to be missing in the case of the liquid consonants and intervocalic.
Yeah. I find it easiest to remember that liquid aorist have a different tense formative than the non-liquid ones. It's saw except for liquids, and then it's ah as a tense formative. Whatever way is easier to remember.
Well,
Okay,
yeah.
he had a footnote 5.
Here is, you want me to read this?
Oh, let's forget that. You can read it if you want to, but it gets complicated. Yeah.
Okay.
Just continue on the next
And
page.
the other parts aren't.
So let's simplify, shall we?
Well, this book that he wrote, he's very proud of this book, and he ought to be. It's
I'm sure.
a mammoth undertaking. But he goes through all these, in my mind, they're convoluted reasons for the rules make it unnecessary to memorize the paradigms.
You know, we're just like trying to be first year students.
Yeah.
Instead, okay, I'll keep reading. Instead of adding sa as the tense formative, liquid verbs only add the ah, and then sometimes modify the tense stem. And sometimes modify the tense stem. Our paradigm.
Well, that happened to meno. Remember, men is the present tense stem, but main was modified from men. It added a iota.
Okay, I'm sorry, just a minute. Because aren't we told that the stem might be different for each tense? So it's confusing.
Well, it might be, but
that he's saying he modified the tense stem. Does,
yeah.
I'm sorry, but this is a mix-up of vocabulary because he talked about there's only one root, but there's a tense stem for each tense, and they don't have to be the same. So this is a confusing statement.
He gave the example of balo with 2 lambdas,
yeah,
present tense stem.
Yeah.
Bal with 1 lambda is the aorist
yes.
Root.
Okay.
But here he's not making the same. He's inconsistent, I think. Meno is men is the present tense stem of that verb, but main mu epsilon iota nu is it's different, but he's not considering it.
One case he says that the actual truth. I don't know how to say this. I don't want to say something he didn't say. Yeah. In one case, he said we modified the tense, the aorist tense stem to get the present tense stem.
That's you modified the root, the verbal root.
Modified the root to get the present tense.
Yeah.
And in other cases, he didn't say this. Is he saying they modified the verbal root to get the aorist stem?
No, he's not. But what he is, he remember that word he introduced called ablaut?
I remember hearing it.
Yeah. Ablaut is simply changing the vowels a little bit. Sometimes you add a vowel, sometimes you take it away, sometimes you change it a little bit, but that's not the same thing as altering the root to form a different tense stem.
I think the real thing we see here is that the stem for the present, the stem, I don't know what, this doesn't say anything because the stems will be different.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know what he's saying. The phenomenon of the liquids affect only the future and aorist tenses. Okay.
So for other tenses, which we'll learn, such as the perfect tense, you won't have this thing coming into.
Okay. They will not come into consideration in any of our remaining chapters. Well, can we say thank you? Paradigm. Okay, 23.14. Paradigm. First aorist active indicative liquid.
Let's not take the time to read it now. I don't think that's very productive, but need to know that it's there. And when you, in the exercises, when you run across a liquid verb,
So first the aorist active, we had the other one. This is the one with a liquid verb, right?
Mhm,
Is
that's
that what we're
right.
saying?
Mhm.
This is the equivalent of 23.5 for a liquid, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay. As you can see, do you want me to keep reading these?
yeah, go ahead.
As you can see, meno has altered its stem in the aorist tense. The eta is changed to eta ipsilon, eta ips,
Epsilon iota.
epsilon, I'm sorry,
Yoda.
epsilon iota. All verbs that occurred 50 times or more and have a liquid aorist are listed in the appendix, pages 460 and
I put it all in that color-coded chart for all the verbs occurring 50 times or more.
Right, but he says 460 and 61 specifically are all of the liquid verbs. You've got the actual liquid ones shown here separately. Well, okay.
Yeah, iro, apasnesko, apokrinomai, and so forth.
Yeah.
Some of those are very common.
That's helpful for figuring it out, I guess. Okay. Now, 23.15 forms. The keys to recognizing a liquid aorist are two. The final stem consonant is a liquid, and the tense formative is alpha, not sigma alpha.
Okay.
Aorist middle indicative. 23.16. Like the future, the aorist uses distinct forms for the middle and the passive. You will learn aorist passives in the next chapter.
Yeah, that's it combines aorist passive and future passive together, but we'll get there.
Just like the future middle uses the same tense as the future active, so also the aorist middle uses the same tense stem as the aorist active, but it uses middle passive personal endings.
Okay, that's the same thing as what we saw with the other tense.
With aorist. So this is the same thing as second aorist, right? These statements, are these not true?
Let's see.
I'm sorry.
I can't remember that.
We're really in trouble. I'm looking at my cheat sheet. This thing here. It appears that seems to be so. Sorry, personal endings. So it has distinct forms for the middle and passive. Okay.
Yeah. Remember in the present tense, the middle and passive
Had the same. Oh, that's what he's saying. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It is like the only one that does. So why do we keep needing to say that?
Because you have an aorist passive that's totally different from the aorist middle.
Yes. And we learned that already for second aorist. And okay, they're not. So for future, they're the same endings, right? Middle and passive.
Yeah, that's right.
And for imperfect, they're also the same. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes. All right.
We don't need to read the paradigms, just know that they're there. 2320.
What? Okay. Middle only or deponent. Traditionally, we have taught that the aorist middle can be deponent, middle in form but active in meaning. I won't try to repeat that.
Agenita, the underlined verb there is
yes.
That's middle only, or deponent middle is another term. By the way, we may have said it before, but there are deponents that are passive deponents. But we haven't really run across them yet. But
what does that mean?
Well, it's active meaning, but middle or passive in form. So far, I think we've only run into middle deponents, but there are also some passive deponents. We'll we'll get into it. Just
You're saying there's some that don't have an active or middle form? They only have the
No.
passive form?
They don't have an active form. They only have a middle or passive form, but the meaning is active.
Yeah, that's what a middle is. That's what a deponent is. So what did you
Yeah.
just say that's different?
Because so far we've only run into middle deponents.
What's a passive deponent?
Um,
No,
uh,
what is it?
just a minute, I'll get it. Apokryphe, that means to answer. The theta eta is the tense formative for aorist passive.
Okay, does that mean?
But let's wait till we get there, Dave, to talk about it. I'm mentioning that there is a passive deponent.
Well, if it's deponent, it means it doesn't actually have an active form.
Yes, it only has an active form.
What?
No pat.
Now you said it has an active meaning with a passive form. Isn't that what you just said? Am I?
Yeah.
Passive meaning.
Maybe I said it wrong.
Yeah, active meaning, passive
Like
form.
you're saying that it's written as if it looks like it's passive,
Yeah,
but the actual meaning is active voice.
that's right.
So that would
So
imply
it's
it's
like a very
missing.
deceptive
Well,
looking word.
but I think what that means is that it doesn't have an active form, and it also doesn't have a middle form.
It doesn't have an active form, but it does have a middle form quite often. Yeah,
It has a middle form,
middle or passive form, but not.
but the forms are different for aorist. So there's a middle form and a different passive form.
That's right.
So if it's passive deponent, it still has a middle form that means middle.
No, it's either passive deponent or middle deponent, but
So if it's passive deponent, it means it doesn't have a middle or active form. It only has a passive form.
form. Yeah.
Yes, that's what I said.
Okay.
So there's only one form. It doesn't have the active or middle form. It only has a passive form.
Yeah.
And the meaning's active.
For instance,
Okay.
the verb ginomai.
You follow that?
I'm following you. I'm just imagining whenever you find this thing, not mistaking it's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
It seems like a false cognate. You know,
Well,
something
when
that
we look
immediately
in,
makes you think it's something that isn't.
well, when we look in Mounce's dictionary, that's not the right word.
Lexicon.
Lexicon, he'll tell us this.
Yeah. Well,
But
it will.
you remember when you see it.
No,
That's
no.
When you see the middle ending in the lexical form,
Yes,
then you know it's
that's when
deponent.
we know. It'll be the lexical form of it if it's
Yeah.
deponent.
Yeah.
Deponent means the lexical form is that way. That's exactly right. Yeah. And he's got those lists of forms, and
Yeah.
it won't be having those.
In the present tense, if it's omai ending,
Yeah.
then it's deponent.
Okay. All right.
Present tense.
Gosh, how weird.
And you'll have
Or
situations where it's
thane.
deponent in one tense, but not in another
Thane.
tense, and I don't understand how
So,
that is, but
or thane or psane. What else would be passive, right? Yeah.
you know,
Okay.
we're just about done with this now. Let me read this 2320. Middle only or deponent. Traditionally, we have taught that the aorist middle can only be deponent, middle in form, but active in meaning.
Mm-hmm.
He gives this example for agenita.
Mm-hmm.
Agenita can mean become or happen or even be or come to be or something like that. It's got a very flexible
Mm-hmm.
meaning. But here this is the aorist middle, agenita.
What?
See that in the paradigm above 23.18, agenita.
No, I understand what you
I'm
said.
just picturing the way you're describing a genital. In the Septuagint, it sounds like that might very well be the verb they use in Genesis 1:2.
I think so. Yeah. And
because that's a word that's very famously in the Bible debated as to whether it means was or became.
yeah, I'll check that out.
What-
If I can
Which,
remember.
I'm sorry, Genesis.
Genesis 1:2.
And the earth
And the-
was without form or
Famously
void.
in the King James and the
Oh,
earth
well,
was without form and
yes.
void.
Septuagint, it's probably this word.
That's
Yeah,
what I was
probably.
just thinking. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
probably a good
That's
example
right.
of how that
Yeah.
word might be interpreted
Yeah.
different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Okay. You can tell if a verb is middle deponent in the aorist by looking at its third tense form. And the third one is the one right after the one in parentheses.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Is that right? No, it's that's the future. Okay, look at this example. Ginomai, the first word there, that's present tense lexical form.
Right.
And the root is gen, not gin, gen. Gin is the present tense stem, but gen is the root.
But that's not the point he's making.
No,
right?
well, I'm getting there. Okay. Then the second one, which is in parentheses, is the imperfect form, and that's based on the present tense. And it's not a tense formative. No, that's not it's not a tense form. There are 6 tense forms, and this one in parentheses is not one of them. It's just simply there because that's his method of showing the imperfect. The second one is genesomai, and that's the future. And it's also deponent because the omai ending, or the my ending. The third one, which is underlined, that's our aorist. It's a second aorist, but that's got the main ending, and that's a secondary ending. So it's telling you that it's also deponent in the aorist. So when you're trying to find the different tense forms, which there are 6 of them, present is the first one, future is the second one, aorist is the third one. The third one, in this case, is deponent middle.
And we have the passive personal ending, but that entry in the lexicon is usually active. So we wouldn't expect mu, eta, new, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
If it were
if it weren't deponent, it would have just new, right?
I'm trying to remember, just my mind has to get in gear for this. Okay, look back to
it would be, this is the first aorist, right? So
no, second aorist.
Genomai is a second aorist.
Yes.
So remember using this as an example. This is a chapter about first aorist.
It is.
This is.
I'm not sure I can answer that very well.
But it's genoso.
No, ginomai, not ginosko.
No, but look. Yeah. What?
All right.
It's just so not very helpful.
I don't think that's very helpful.
It's just so not very helpful when he gives us a second aorist example.
Okay. Now he's summarizing, which you can read on your own, and then he's filling in the rest of the masculine indicative verb chart. He's going to keep building that up until we get all the tenses. And then we have the vocabulary. One thing that's, I think, pretty important.
Exactly the same.
Well,
it's exactly the same example we used for the second aorist.
Yeah, it is. So he's repeating.
All right.
Okay. In the vocabulary, I want to point out one thing in footnote 7 pertaining to archomai, the second word in the vocabulary. It means I begin, but the footnote says archomai is an unusual word. 84 times in the New Testament, it functions as a middle, meaning begin. However, twice it functions as an active, archo, and it means I rule. And that's where it happens, Mark and Romans. And both of those words are active meanings, begin and rule. So, but you can't say that it's a deponent verb because there is a it's got a middle form and an active form.
Archomai.
Archomai.
Archomai. Archomai. It's archomai and archomane.
Yeah, archomai and erchomane.
Erchomane. And that is the
that
is the aorist. No.
Yeah. Archomai is the present tense. Erchomane. Now he's only got 5 there. Wait a minute. It's different. Erchomai. Erchomai. It's not a key, it's a C.
Erchomai.
And that's the future.
Yes.
And the third one is the aorist.
Yes. But it has no other tenses.
Right. Because those 3 dashes mean those tenses don't occur in the New Testament.
Okay. I'm just trying to wrap this is a complicated thing here.
Mm-hmm.
Main. Like this one did a lot of weird stuff to get that form. Right? Okay, yeah. So what that is a deponent then.
Well,
yes,
you would think it is, except for the fact that there are 2 examples where it has an active form. A deponent is a verb that doesn't have an active form.
I'm really lost because then why is he telling us that its form, he doesn't give us its active? What would his active form look like?
Archo. See the one in parentheses?
What, am I blind?
Footnote.
In the footnote.
In the footnote. There's the active form. It's not omai, it's omega.
But that's present tense.
Yes, and the present tense is the lexical form.
Okay, but we're looking. Okay, I'm sorry. That's not a problem. I'm sort of lost here. Though, okay. I don't.
Archomai is the lexical form, but that's the one exception that I know of where the my ending normally tells you that it's deponent in that tense.
Why in the world?
But there is an active form in that tense.
If there's an active form, then why would they form the lexicon this way? Because looking at the lexicon, you wouldn't know what the verb is. I mean, I'm just asking dumb questions.
Let's look in the back.
I don't think it's a dumb question.
No, it's not.
I don't understand such a strange thing to do.
Well, see,
this has the look and feel to me of something to which the answer to your question is lost to antiquity.
Yeah, was it just bad language skills that, I mean, I'm sorry, but was it a word that wasn't really a word, like saying I swammed. I,
I don't know.
An evolution, the lack of use of some previous word, and then they substitute this.
I mean, like he says, there's this form, but is it just only in those two places ever? In Koine Greek, it exists, and so the lexical form doesn't show it, and so you have to have a. It's like this is improper grammar use, and we just have to know it.
Well, this is
I'm sorry. That's what it seems to beg, right? Huh?
Something carried forward from linear A.
No, but right. I mean, that's how
like that.
you will not find swam in any English text or language. But if someone said it, we'd know what he meant. I swammed.
Yeah,
I
we'd
swam.
also know that it wasn't a very well-educated person.
I swimmed, and we'd all know what they meant.
Yeah.
But it would be a footnote in some future text about English. I don't know. Is that what this is? I'm just wondering because it's very odd.
okay. Look here. This is the lexicon in the back of the textbook.
Oh,
It
yeah.
only lists archimine.
Yeah.
It doesn't list arco.
Okay.
But in this other lexicon, it does list arco. Where is it?
All right. I'm going to look it up. My analytical lexicon. Are you in the analytical Greek lexicon?
It's on page 77. Arco.
And
and then it lists a future middle, archomai. So
the more standard form of this analytical Greek lexicon done by somebody else shows you that form.
Yeah. And it says the active meaning is rule over or be leader of in Mark 10:42. But the middle meaning is begin or start. But both of those words, rule and begin, are active in meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
So it looks like a deponent verb, but it's got a couple of active meanings.
Fair enough.
And it's because we need, I think we need a little more complication to this. It might be interesting to know that those two instances are both in the infinitive in Mark and Romans. I know we haven't gotten there yet, but maybe that's a preview for the future.
Where did you find that?
In an interlinear online, it's listed. According to this, I don't recognize the form, but they say it's an infinitive in both of those places where it kind of can't mean to begin. It definitely, in context, has to be like first among or something like that. Huh?
So you're saying it's actually not even this active form?
Well, I don't know. Is there an active infinitive?
No, he's saying he says in his footnote, however, twice it functions as an active arco and means I rule and makes it so you would think it means that in those verses it's actually in the form arco.
No, the form is alpha rho c epsilon iota nu. So I guess that'd be arcsine.
Arcsane.
Arcsane.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. All right, I want to point out one more thing and then we're
done. Okay. I don't know. All right. This is sort of like
the previous words after the
it's like watching a tennis match. It's like playing monkey in the middle a little bit, you know, and Mounts is talking this way and there's this other stuff going on. It just isn't very helpful.
Okay. After the vocabulary section, he's got previous words. And these are, he's going to present the three tenses we've learned so far, present, future, and aorist, giving the form. And sometimes there'll be a dash, meaning that there is no form in the New Testament for that word. But this will fill in the gaps of our learning for all the verbs. And so you might need to refer to that in the exercises.
Okay.
Now notice on page 260 that one little section there that has multiple stems. Remember we had verbs like Lego, And the future has a different stem, and then the aorist has an even different stem, three different ones. Another one is horao. That has 3 different stems.
Okay.
All right. So the assignment for next week is to do at least the first page of the exercises, which is the parsing and warm-up. I've given you my work on this, and if you have time and inclination to go beyond that, do so.
Okay.
We'll
Thank you for your patience again.
Okay. It's we're getting a lot more under our belt, I realize, and we've probably forgotten some of the things that we learned already.
Would the first page be up to finishing the warm-ups and then up through?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This is sort of our pattern. Do the warm-up, the parsing and the warm-up. The first after reading the chapter.
Dig into
and if you can go farther, that's great. We'll get into it together in the first 10 exercises.
Sounds good.
My goal, hopefully, is to do each, take 3 weeks per chapter. Read the chapter together and answer any questions that we might have. And then the first assignment is to do the first page of the exercises and beyond that if you can. And then we'll finish it up in the third session.
All right.
Okay. Would one of you fellows like to close us in prayer?
Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and for giving us this time together. Thank you, Lord, for providing us Carl and for his willingness to share what he's learned and to teach us to understand your word better. Please help us now as we go throughout the rest of this week to keep you in the forefront of everything that we do, to follow you, to understand your leading. Please help us, Lord, to be able to get back together again on Sunday in your house, if it's your will, and to worship you as you see fit that you want us to worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay. We didn't.
Drew, before you leave,
let me stop.
I think you're expecting a baby.